Hello.
I'm Lauren.
And of course, I am Ken.
And this is Paradise After Dark.
Dark.
Paradise After Dark is an independent podcast covering true crime,
Unsolved mysteries,
missing people,
and every now and then an urban legend.
If you'd like to support our little show and get a bunch of extra Paradise After Dark content, please sign up for our Patreon at patreon.com/PalmahawkMedia. That's Palmahawk Media.
And please be sure to check out our website at paradiseafterdark.com.
On the website, you'll find links to all of our episodes, even the archived episodes, our mailing list, merch store, links to our social medias, and of course our Patreon.
And if you are a sponsor looking to sponsor the show, please reach out to us directly. And we also, Lauren, on our website have a little tiny tip jar that occasionally people can throw a couple coins in there, and we'll give them a shout out on the show.
Yeah, a virtual tip jar, obviously.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're not going to be throwing real coins because then it would just hit their computer screen. That would be no good.
So we have a couple shout outs this week. Got Jordan from Bloomington, Indiana.
Ooh, take me back home.
That's where. That's about where you're from, isn't it?
I'm from Franklin, which is a little south of Indianapolis, but Bloomington is where IU is.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I
cool.
believe it. Yeah, is that? Yeah, IU. Yeah, that's it.
Cool.
We also have a double team, Connie and Bonnie from Douglasville, Georgia.
Connie and Bonnie.
That's it. Connie, Bonnie, Bobani, Fanana, Fana, Fofani.
I wonder, are they sisters?
More money.
Are they twins? Are they friends?
Give us more money. I'm kidding. I don't know. But Connie and Bonnie hooked us up, so we want to thank everyone very much.
Thank you, Connie and Bonnie.
From Indiana to Georgia.
All right, so let's jump into it. I just want to say that we came across this case courtesy of my mother.
Your mother?
Yes.
Is that where this came from?
Because I had a little mental block and I didn't have anything coming down the pipe as far as cases to cover. And my mom happened to be over at our house. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Mom. And I said, Mom, give me a case. Give me something. And I really didn't expect her. She doesn't listen to our show. She's not into true crime. But she immediately said, Beverly Jarosz. And I said, well, who's that? Do tell, Mother. Well, apparently, my mother lived not in the same suburb, but in a suburb right next to Garfield Heights, Ohio. This is where my mom grew up. And this happened when she was about 12 or 13 years old, and it freaked her out so bad. Like this case, this murder that we're going to cover tonight was my mother's first, I don't know how you say it, like shot of reality.
Like her first experience with a criminal element like this?
Yeah,
like this magnitude?
Someone close to her age in her town, just like one suburb over, was murdered. And it really scared her. I guess it really scared her and freaked her out for a long time. She was afraid to walk to the bus stop. She was afraid to be home alone. I mean, it really had a big impact on her. Maybe that's why she doesn't like true crime. I don't know.
Well, and when you're younger, you don't think of it in the aspect of, oh, that can't happen to me because I'm just a kid, right? You never think of dying when you're young. You always think of that's something that happens to older people, but when something like this occurs and things, communities nearby, they all heard this. It was in the paper. And I got to believe that even your mother's parents were reading it in the paper or knew of this tragedy and were like, whoa,
yeah,
we have to let the kids know that they've got to start being careful. So we got to lock doors. We got to do certain things. So why don't you got us all pumped up here, Lauren. So get us started.
All
Let's
right.
talk about it.
So December 28th of 1964. The quiet town of Garfield Heights, Ohio, was rocked by a brutal, chilling murder, the stabbing death of 16-year-old Beverly Jarosz. Beverly was a junior at Marymount High School, an all-girls Catholic school. At age 16, Beverly was a literary soul, always quoting Shakespeare and writing poetry in her diary. She was the epitome of innocent, all-American schoolgirl in a more innocent all-American time. This is 1964.
Mm-hmm.
She lived in a tidy suburb with her parents and one sister. Her mother, Eleanor, worked in an office, and her father, Thaddeus, who went by Ted, was co-owner of a small manufacturing firm.
Now, one thing I got to note here is, do you notice how this is 1964 and both parents were working? That was usually odd in this scenario to me.
You're right, yeah.
To me, it seemed like I was like, they're both at work. Usually early 60s, the woman just stayed home.
The mom stayed home.
Usually when there was children involved.
My grandmother stayed home. My grandmother never worked a day in her life.
Lucky her.
Well, Beverly was dating a straight-laced college boy, and everyone in her life was exactly who they seemed to be. There was no drama, no secrets. I mean, she was like I said, the epitome of an innocent, all-American girl, family life, you know?
So at this point, everything in her life was just sort of on the up and up, and she kind of had this glowing lifestyle.
There was one thing that was going on that we're going to get into in a little bit.
Okay, we'll cross that bridge.
Yes.
But right now, let's just go ahead and let's kind of give a sort of an intro to the timeline of what's going on right now with Beverly, and kind of put this in perspective of how the time of this morning where all of this occurred kind of transpired.
Okay.
Okay, so like you said, it was Monday, December 28th, 1964. Now, keep in mind this is a Christmas holiday, right? So Beverly's parents were at their jobs, as we spoke about, but Beverly and her sister were still out of school for the Christmas holiday. Now, after their parents left for work, Beverly and Carol walked to their grandmother's house, Mary Vanek home, and arrived there roughly at 12:30 p.m. And Beverly, at this point, told her grandmother that she needed to return home and meet with two friends. Now, her girlfriend, Barbara, was going to come over about 12:30, and they were going to visit their third friend, Margie, between 1 and 2 p.m. Now, an 18-year-old neighbor of Beverly's grandmother was asked by his mother to give Beverly a ride to her house. So after Beverly arrived home at 1 p.m., she called her mother to let her mother know that she had made it home safely and to relay this message from a jeweler that had phoned regarding a repair on a necklace. Apparently, the jeweler calls and says this necklace, and apparently this necklace belonged to her great-grandmother, said, hey, this is not fixable, not repairable. So she wanted to tell her mom that and say, Mom, I'm home, by the way. The jeweler called about Grandma's necklace. And soon after this, she calls her friend Barbara and talks to her until roughly 1:10. Now, at the time of that call ending, Beverly then receives a call from a man asking for her father, Thaddeus. Now, remember, he goes by Ted. The caller identified himself as Stephen Stankiewicz and said that he would call back. And police later find out that this Stephen Stankiewicz was a fictitious name. So someone had called and given Beverly a fictitious name. Now, immediately following that call, Beverly's grandmother also called to make sure that Beverly made it home safely. They had a brief conversation as Beverly told her grandmother that she had to go because she thought her friend Barbara was at the door. Now, this was the last conversation Beverly had with anyone except the killer.
Well, Beverly's friend Barbara arrived at Beverly's house at 1:20 p.m. She went around to the side door and noticed that the storm door was locked, but the inner door stood open. Barbara knocked 10 times and proceeded to the front door. She knocked and rang the bell, but Beverly didn't answer. Barbara assumed she couldn't hear the bell over the radio, which was blaring classical music in the living room. She eventually gave up and headed home. During this time waiting, Barbara told the family and the police that she had heard what sounded like furniture being moved upstairs. The third friend, Margie, called later to see why they hadn't shown. Remember, they had made plans. The three of them, Beverly, Barbara, and Margie, were supposed to hang out that day. And from there, they contacted Beverly's grandmother, who called Beverly's father. So Margie's calling Barbara saying, where are you guys?
Yeah, you're supposed to be at my house between 1 and 2.
Barbara says that she can't get a hold of Beverly, so they call Beverly's grandmother. Beverly's grandmother calls Ted Jarosz, who rushed home and at 4:10 in the afternoon found both doors unlocked. He could hear the loud music playing, so he rushes inside to find his daughter dead in her second-floor bedroom. At 4:15, the phone rings. Ted answers, and it's Carol, Beverly's sister. He screams one word into the phone: murder. The police arrive next, and a priest. The knowledge of what they found followed the priest, Paul Miles, on his first visit to the house, almost half a century later. I've been to Auschwitz. That was always my gauge of the spookiest place in the world, he said. At Auschwitz, you just get this feeling of evil. I got to that side door of the house, and whoa, You just felt evil. You never knew something happened there. I've been to thousands of crime scenes. Never bothered me. But this one you just knew was evil. Garfield Heights Police Captain William Horrigan, who became the lead investigator on the case, would pursue tips until he died, calling it the worst killing I've ever seen. Her clothing had been yanked upwards and downwards to expose her torso. She had been stabbed in the back and slashed in the neck, but death came from a clothesline knotted around her neck.
When it was all said and done, it was revealed that Beverly was stabbed over 40 times. Overkill is what they call it these days. It's the use of excessive force or action that goes further than what is necessary to achieve its goal. Overkill is a sign of someone out of control and extremely vengeful. Generally, when we see overkill, it's associated with high levels of anger and rage. The culprit and the victim are likely known to each other in overkill cases. It's also common for an attack to come during relationship breakdown or shortly after, according to the Queensland-based criminologist Dr. Claire Ferguson. Now, according to the Family Violence Death Review Committee, out of the 92 intimate partner deaths between 2009 and 2017, overkill deaths made up 52%. The clothesline, of course, remained around Beverly's neck, but the knife or whatever was used to stab her was never found. So whatever it was if it was brought in, they couldn't determine if it was brought or something that was found there.
Right.
They claimed that it could possibly have been this brass letter opener that she kept next to her bed, but if not, then like I said, the killer obviously brought the weapon with them and took it away again afterwards. It's hard to guess. However, the killer in this case did not sexually assault her. The coroner said that Beverly fought her attacker fiercely before she died. So it was almost like it was an attempted rape?
Well, yes, because her clothes were pulled up and down, exposing her torso. So it seems like there was a sexual element to this crime, but there was no sexual assault.
So there's two factors that you have to consider at this point when it gets to that. Was the clothes torn because of the violent attack? So she's fighting fiercely and he's pulling her and stuff, and he's fighting her, throwing her around. As you can witness in some of the crime scene photos, looks like she was thrown up against the ceiling to where it literally busted a hole in the ceiling.
Yes. We have a photo of that, which we'll put on our socials.
It's possible that maybe the clothes got torn that weren't supposed to be torn.
Maybe.
That's one thing to consider. But is it possible that the sexual, if it was sexual intent or an attempted rape murder in this case, that by Barbara knocking on the door or ringing the doorbell,
could have spooked him, stopped that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's always a possibility, something to consider in this case.
Well, the investigation was thorough. The police in Garfield Heights, Ohio, interviewed every boy Beverly had dated or spent time with, the neighbor who gave her a ride, the boy who bagged the groceries at the local grocery store. Of course, they looked at both her straight-laced boyfriend, Roger Mcnamara, and her bad boy ex-boyfriend, Dan Schultz. They both had alibis, but not perfect alibis. But they both passed polygraph tests. There was also a college-age neighbor who apparently had a thing for Beverly, and a door-to-door salesman who had a criminal history of assaulting women, but neither of them could be connected to Beverly's murder either. The investigation continued. Rewards were offered, but sufficient evidence never accumulated against any one person. Investigators scoured the neighborhood from rooftops to sewers, draining a nearby skating pond in the search for evidence to no avail. Now, several factors stand out in this case. One, the killer did not just walk into the house. Both Beverly and her sister Carol were mildly fanatical about keeping doors locked and windows locked. Plus, it was December. Not a time for open windows in Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah, we were literally just in Columbus, Ohio, and I can assure you,
it's cold.
It's cold.
It's cold.
It was March, and it was cold.
Yes. In a time when the populace was largely more trusting than it is today, Beverly would not let anyone she didn't know into the house, not even the meter reader. So it seemed that she must have opened the door for her killer.
Thinking it may have been Barbara, possibly.
Right. Well, she was expecting Barbara.
Exactly.
And when she was on the phone with her grandmother, she said, I've got to go. Barbara's here. So
yeah, correct.
Somebody must have knocked on the door, and she probably just opened it right up, assuming it was Barbara, but it was her killer.
When there's a few other really odd elements to this as far as why it was she was so scared of.
The other reason why Beverly and Carol were so crazy about keeping the doors and windows locked was that the previous summer, a mysterious present had shown up at their house. A gift box from Higbee's department store had been tucked inside the back door with "To Bev" written on it. Now, inside was a silver ring and bracelet. Far from being charmed by the idea of a secret admirer, the gift made Beverly nervous. The sender has never been identified. The ring and the bracelet were nice, but not distinctive enough to trace.
Well, one thing I would have to point out in this situation is the fact that it said "To Bev." So with that being said, it's like someone who would shorten her name would have some sort of personal connection, because if they know it's Beverly, they would say Beverly. You know, it's like if you know someone that's Amy, you don't just go up to the first time and say, "Hey, Aim, how you doing?"
Yeah.
You call them Amy. You know, if your name is Richard, you go up to them and you say, "Hi, Richard." You don't say, "Hey, Dick, how are you?" You know, things like that. So it seems to me that for them to shorten the name, it has to be an element of someone they know.
Well, during the investigation, authorities concluded that Beverly must have had some unknown stalker. She had received many hang-up calls and, as we just mentioned, the bracelet and the ring from an unknown person. Authorities also learned about the caller who gave Beverly the false name, Steven Stankiewicz. Could this have been the killer, calling to make sure she was home alone? Or could this have been her stalker? I mean, Steven Stankiewicz was a fake name. That doesn't exist. But
one thing I want to point out here is keep in mind, I don't want to interrupt you. Keep in mind, it's Christmas break. Kids are at home. Kids could potentially make prank phone calls.
Yes, but she had been receiving these hang-up calls since the summer before, I believe, is when that started. The summer before was when she received the bracelet and the ring, to Bev.
True.
And then she had received hang-up calls, I don't believe it was daily, but, throughout that time up until her death.
Well, keep in mind, too, like I said, if you're out of school, so in the summertime, kids are out of school, they're going to be prank calling, and then they're going to be out of school for Christmas break. I know one Christmas break, I was so bored, I called this local, in Indiana, of course, I called this local drugstore. It's called Hooks, right? Hooks Drugstore. Hooks, right? So I called there, and the gentleman who I see every time I walk in should have known better. I called, he answers the phone, I said, "Hey, do you have pickled pig's feet?" He goes, "No." I said, "Okay, well, do you have Prince Albert and a candy?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, you better let him out." I hung up. So then I called back like in 20 minutes later, and I said, "Hey, is your refrigerator running?" He goes, "My refrigerator? Yeah, the refrigerator's always running here." I said, "Well, you better catch him." And I hung up the phone. I didn't know that there was a way for him to actually track it, because my grandmother asked me about that call. So even back in like the early 80s, there was a way for them to track that call. Obviously, probably not so much in 64.
I wonder if Star 69 was around.
No, I don't think so. There wasn't. I don't think that would have been there, but there was a way to somehow do that. Maybe you could call the phone company, because back then, I mean, you call and it's like BR549. They could just they switchboard stuff. I don't know if they had that in the 80s. I don't know. I wasn't that tech savvy in the 80s. I was just a kid with a mullet. But anyway, back to the case. So just keep in mind that, this could have potentially been, because they could never figure anything out. That's why I say in the 64, there was no way for them obviously to track that phone call to see where it came in from, because they said they could never figure out where it was or where it came from. They could not track it back. But then again, it could have been just some kids making a prank phone call. Could have been the neighbor across the street, saw her walk in the house. "Oh, let's call her real quick. She's home." I don't know. I just put that out there because it's just a random thought Ken has. So here's a situation that we never like to say in true crime. But sadly, 2 days after the murder, the trail on this case went cold. We're no nearer a solution now than we were when the body was found, a detective said at this point. For all I know, we're farther away from one. So they have no solution. They feel like they're farther away from a result in this case. Now, a public appeal brought tips from thousands of people. They came by phone, by mail. Some people stopped by the police station and gave tips. Now, all of them, a reporter wrote, led police down paths paved with hope that turned into labyrinths of frustration. I can only imagine that these tips come in, investigators take the time to check them all out because they want to follow up every lead they can get, only to find, it's kind of a dead end. I could see where that would be very frustrating. Now, no one has ever been charged in Beverly Jarosz's death. Now, Beverly's parents, Thaddeus, died in 2012, while Eleanor, her mother, died in 2018. Keep in mind that Beverly's parents lived to be in their 90s. So this is something that they lived a long, long life with. And currently, Beverly and her parents are all buried at the Calvary Cemetery in Cleveland.
Wow. So you can visit them. You can go see their graves if you want.
Yeah.
If you're in the area.
Yeah. Well, Lauren, let's take us a quick break and we'll come back and talk some more about Beverly. And we're back.
Okay, so the Cuyahoga County coroner, Samuel Gerber, who had actually worked on Cleveland's grisly torso murders in the 1930s, said it was as vicious a crime as I have seen in my 29 years as coroner.
Whoa, that's pretty impressive.
And
statement.
that's a big deal considering he had worked on the torso murders. We haven't covered that, but I've actually looked into it, and that is crazy. That case is, we'll cover it someday in the future. The person came with 2 weapons, said documentary filmmaker Mark Wade Stone, and he told this to the Plain Dealer. Unless you're planning, I don't know why you would have 2. You need 2 weapons. Mm-hmm. Somebody was stalking her, Assistant Cuyahoga County Prosecutor Paul Miles said. Authorities learned Beverly often visited the Cleveland Museum of Art. Now, a guard at the Cleveland Museum of Art recalled seeing an unknown man following Beverly throughout the museum. The guard said he looked angry and described him as tall and thin.
And keep in mind, I think a lot of times, because when I was looking into this, you see that statement and you're like, well, is there video? Oh, it's 1964. There would not be video.
Right, yeah.
So in modern day, and that's why I like early on, a lot of these suspects were being released because they passed a polygraph. Well, in 64, a polygraph had a little more, it was a little more positive in the aspect of, separating truth from fiction, so to speak. You know what I mean? Am I making that clear?
They thought they were a little bit more reliable than they do now.
Reliable. There's the word I'm looking for. Thank you. I leave it up to Lauren. She always comes in at a pinch.
Investigators who said during a revisitation of the case in a 2014 story in the Plain Dealer that the speed of the killing convinced them that the killing was planned. Beverly's mother, Eleanor, and sister Carol recalled the stalking at Carol's home in Northeast Ohio. Also present at the interview were Mark Wade Stone, author James Madol, and private investigator Floyd Connaught. Both women remembered hang-up calls, sometimes 10 or 12 a day on the family's party line phone before the murder. They remembered the anonymous gift of a bracelet and ring left on the back porch, quote, to Bev. Carol said her father came home one night and saw someone on the lawn staring up at the girl's bedroom and chased him down the block but couldn't catch him. Bev became jumpy, always careful to lock the doors and draw the blinds. She checked in by phone whenever she went somewhere, and she bought a brass letter opener she kept handy for protection. There was not one person I could suggest who might have done it to her, Eleanor said. I couldn't help the detectives in any way. I always thought it was a stalker. From about the time her daughter turned 16, she said, I had a premonition. Every time I looked at Beverly, I was concerned about her. I thought something was going to happen to her body. The only premonition I ever had. The girl's grandmother might have felt it too, Carol said. When Margie called her, wondering where Beverly was, Grandma said, "Oh my God, she's dead."
Now, normally this statement would seem odd in a lot of cases, but one thing to note about Beverly is Beverly, a few days prior to her murder, she received a book from her father. It was a book. It's like a poetry book. It was like a journal book. And he explained to her that if she took this book and she filled this book out with all of her poems, because she loved to write poetry, she quoted Shakespeare, things like this.
Yeah.
He explained to her that if she filled this book up, that he would take this book and send it off and have it published. So she diligently started working. And there's actually, I think they have sort of fulfilled her dream of this book being published. And sadly, the book is called Unfulfilled. And the reason it's called Unfulfilled is one particular poem that stands out that was written by Beverly just a few days prior to her being murdered, called Thought of Life. From out of the depths of my soul, there arises a certain fear. What if I should die within next year? Life for me has just begun. All of my dreams would be unfulfilled. All of my work left undone. All of my goals unreached. My life would have been in vain. So this is the poem that she's writing in there. So her family had access to these poems and they knew about these poems. So for the grandmother to have this sort of premonition is not too far off kilter to say, "Oh my God, she's dead." You know what I mean?
Yeah, I got goosebumps actually. I didn't know that.
Yeah, but you never read the poems? Yeah.
No.
You can actually buy the book, the poem book, on eBay. I think it's available on Amazon. And you should do that. It helps support. The profits go to help support certain aspects of this.
Okay, I definitely will buy it.
So now that that's been said, I just wanted to kind of clarify that because a lot of people be like, why would the grandma say, "Oh my God, she's dead"? Maybe the grandma had something to do with it. No, it's just her and her grandma were very connected. So just to keep that in mind. Now, at this point, detectives have decided that Beverly must have known her killer because she would not have left the door unlocked or allowed anyone into the home that she didn't know. There was no sign of forced entry or a scuffle on the first floor. But keep in mind, like we talked about earlier, it's possible that she thought it was her friend Barbara. But I think this is detectives are saying, okay, well, that's probably not the case because she would not have opened the door if it was not Barbara, because she would have been cautious enough to say, "Who is it?"
Right.
So keep that in mind.
Or look through the people.
Exactly. And I think detectives did their due diligence in this job, or did their due diligence in this case, I should say, rather. Now, investigators go ahead. They scour the neighborhood from the rooftops to the sewers, and like Laura mentioned earlier, draining a nearby skating pond to search for any type of evidence. They're looking for the knife or
whatever was used to stab her
more
with.
of the rope or anything that had anything to do with the murder of Beverly. Now, more than a dozen people were interviewed, and almost immediately an investigation that initially focused on friends and acquaintances. So they start interviewing everybody that Beverly knows. They talk to all the friends, all the family members, and start that all off. And so by the second day, investigators have already spoke to and took notes on 130 different people. Then the net widened. The Cleveland Press offers up a $5,000 reward, but that was soon raised to $10,000. Now, mind you, this was at a time when the average annual household income was only $6,000. But even with the reward, authorities continued to fall short of finding Beverly's killer for the next 58 years.
Now, there was not a lack of theories or suspects in this case, and Reddit user 2000 Slapping Hands did a great job compiling 6 major suspects in the case.
And also creating a great Reddit name.
Daniel Schultz was Beverly's 19-year-old ex-boyfriend who was considered the bad boy ex and a greaser in the teen circles of the time.
A greaser?
Remember Greaser? Do you remember? Did you ever read The Outsiders?
No, I think I've seen the movie.
Really?
You know me, Lauren.
You didn't read it?
Probably not.
Stay golden, pony boy.
Stay golden, pony. I think I remember seeing that in the movie. Maybe. I don't know.
Okay, well, Schultz hung out with a rough greaser crowd, trying to imitate James Dean. I wonder if he rolled his cigarette pack up in his...
Yeah, you always got to have an extra pack of cigarettes rolled up in a t-shirt sleeve.
And he associated with a group of other bad people at the time. Apparently these are bad people. Schultz claimed to have been working when Beverly was killed and showed a time card supporting his claim. However, his next-door neighbor claims to have seen him arrive home in a hurry. He had a weak alibi, but passed a lie detector test, so I wouldn't call him, like, the most likely suspect.
Yeah, and, it could have been that he was having a bad day at work. He could have had to be somewhere else.
And as we mentioned earlier, the polygraph tests in 1964 were not as reliable as they are today.
However, police relied on them more.
Yes. Moreover, in more recent years, Daniel Schultz refused to talk to police and ended up moving to Israel.
Now, Roger Mcnamara, this is Beverly's 19-year-old boyfriend at the time of her murder. This is the one we described as the straight-laced conservative college student. So, quite the opposite of her greaser ex-boyfriend Daniel Schultz. Now, Roger claimed to have been homesick when Beverly was killed. Just like Daniel, it seems that Roger, though, had a weak alibi, but he did pass that lie detector test that he was given. Now, Roger was reportedly at a party the previous night, which was at Beverly's house, so it does seem unlikely that they'd be on bad terms the following day, which makes perfect sense, because why would he's going to be over there and then, home the next day? It could be maybe he snuck a few drinks or something and got sick. But it seems to me like, for the most part, that he was on the up and up with the family and Beverly, and there was no evidence that they had a fight that night. No one said there was a fight. It wasn't anything that was given to investigators.
Well, John Pallion, Beverly's 19-year-old neighbor who lived 2 houses east of the Jarosz household, he was stated to have an eye for Beverly by neighbors and admitted that he would spy on Beverly sunbathing in her backyard during the summer months. He was also home alone at the time, so there's no one who can vouch for him. He was stated by classmates to be shy, so it's possible that he was the one who left the anonymous gift for Beverly because he couldn't muster the courage to speak to her directly. Moreover, Pallion did not pass the lie detector test. It was inconclusive.
Ooh, so his book came up inconclusive.
He was rumored to have asked a coworker how to pass a lie detector test before he took it.
So most likely he was asked to take a lie detector test and he was nervous as hell. And therefore it could have came up inconclusive because he was nervous.
But, as we know, in all likelihood, Beverly had all the doors in the house locked, and she probably wouldn't have opened the door for Pallion because she didn't know him very well.
Well, keep in mind, too, when you say 2 houses down, these houses were literally crunched together.
Yeah.
So Lauren and I had some off-mic conversation about the homes in this area. If it were not so cold outside, I think the doors and windows would have been open. People probably would have heard the screams and the rumblings of what was going on and transpiring upstairs. Yeah. So because the houses are so close together, I mean, if your window's open, you literally... Do you remember the shows where they had the kids, the boys would always have the tin cans with the line between them?
Yes.
That's the scenario. That's how close these houses were. So when you say 2 houses, we're not talking like a lot of land in between. We're literally talking like a stone's throw.
They're like on top of each other.
Exactly, a stone's throw. Which this kid could necessarily... He could be the stalker that maybe was calling just hoping to catch her. We could talk to her. Maybe he was shy. He would hang up. Could have been the guy that he chased down, the father chased down the street. So this guy really had a lot of marks against him, if you will.
All right. Let's take a quick break. Okay, and we're back. So next we have Bruce Bialik, a 21-year-old college student living directly behind the Jarosz household in 1964. Now, he claimed to have been working on his car, which was supported by his parents. It is notable that later on he became an art teacher at a high school, and he reportedly asked female students to pose in bikinis so he could take photos of them. He made at least a couple of his female students uncomfortable, and he made a student's assistant so uncomfortable that she left her job. There was some sort of joke going on in Beverly's circle of friends where Beverly was teased about Bruce wanting to see her in a robe. Additionally, Beverly once wrote Margie a letter saying that Bruce once went over to her house to see what she looked like without clothes. Something else that's notable is that Bruce apparently sometimes gave Beverly and her younger sisters rides from church, so it would appear that Bruce and Beverly were quite familiar with one another. Bruce's alibi was considered solid, so he was never even given a polygraph. Next, we have Harry Madol, a creepy 17-year-old door-to-door salesman who moved to Garfield Heights in September of 1964, 3 months before Beverly's murder. The argument for Harry Madol possibly being Beverly's killer is that he had a violent record. So he stabbed a woman in January of 1965. Then he went on to rape his stepmother. He couldn't account for his whereabouts between 12 p.m. and 5 p.m. on December 28, 1964. He also confessed to Beverly's murder, but then recanted it.
Huh?
He confessed, but then recanted it. His polygraph was inconclusive. However, there was no actual evidence that he even knew Beverly. In the 3 months in between the time he moved to Garfield Heights and Beverly's murder, he worked at a place where Beverly went on one occasion. So while it's possible that they crossed paths, it is nothing but speculation. And the only thing that makes him plausible are the recanted confessions and his violent crimes. Moreover, the only way it could have been him is if Beverly left her door unlocked that day, which was highly unlikely.
Yeah.
Or she opened the door for him, which was also highly unlikely. We know the house was not broken into, so we know that Beverly would never have allowed a random dude into the house. So Madol's chance of even getting in that house was slim to none.
Okay, one thing I want to kind of go back on real quick while we're talking about suspects, and I want to bring this to light, because you don't necessarily put this in place until you start thinking about the actual crime itself. Now, in one instance, it was noted that the attack on Beverly was very violent, and the detectives said that she fought back fiercely. So she was throwing hands. She was fighting for her life, right? In one case, I see it, and I think maybe we'll post this picture. And in the picture, it shows the rope that was used to strangle Beverly. And it says Beverly's killer stabbed her so violently that the rope being used to strangle her was accidentally cut. She was stabbed 40 times. She fought for her life. She was thrown into the ceiling, which busted a hole. She was struggling. Her clothes were torn. And if detectives are going to say that she violently fought back, she fiercely fought back against this guy to protect herself, to stay alive, don't you think that there would have been some wounds on these guys? There would have been something. I mean, it's a stab wound. You stabbed someone 40 times. It said that she was stabbed in the head, the neck. When you're hitting bones, sometimes if you got to have a knife,
your hand slips, you cut yourself. So
I try to keep that in mind when I don't necessarily want to take all of the evidence and say, okay, he passed a polygraph, he failed a polygraph. In 1964, maybe they gave him a polygraph because they were trying to find if they knew of something. And the reason I say that is because I've got to believe that the detectives were looking at these gentlemen, obviously watching their body language and how they reacted. And even the guy that confessed, they probably didn't see any of these wounds that existed. And these people were, keep in mind, this was within a couple days. Because remember, the 48 hours is the most crucial. And the detectives did their due diligence, and within a couple days, they'd spoke to 130 people. And I got to believe they were looking for those wounds. They were looking for beat up hands, cut face, scratches, tears, anything. Now, do you agree with me that would have been? I mean, you would think that'd be present if. I mean, even though. I mean, this wasn't a child. This was not a 10-year-old. I mean, she's old enough to fight. And it said, obviously, she had, some marks on her showing some defensive wounds, if you will, where she was defending herself. So I got to believe that would have definitely played a huge part in this case when it comes to the suspects. So when you're talking about the men and stuff that took the polygraphs, I got to believe that was something detectives were looking into at the time.
Okay. Well, our last suspect is Barbara Klenowski. This is Beverly's friend who was supposed to meet her that day, who showed up at the house, heard the loud music. Beverly didn't answer the door, so she left. So Beverly was said to be among the most attractive girls in Garfield Heights and had many male admirers. She was easily the best with males in her friend group. According to the people who went to school with the girls in Beverly's friend group, Margie didn't have a jealous bone in her body and seemed to be the only one that didn't mind all the attention that Beverly got from the boys. Barbara apparently did.
So there was a bit of animosity there.
So we know that Beverly was super cautious because she had been stalked and she kept her doors locked. She didn't trust anyone. She didn't trust a lot of people. But obviously Barbara would have been someone that she would have trusted.
And she was expecting her there.
Right. So no one was there. Nobody saw Barbara waiting at Beverly's door. Barbara claimed to have been running late, and the only person to support this was Barbara's mom,
who dropped her off.
Barbara did not meet up with her other friend Margie, who Beverly and Barbara were originally supposed to meet up with, and Margie had to call Barbara to find out what happened. Now, the fact that Barbara didn't meet up with Margie and didn't even call to let her know that her and Beverly weren't coming is kind of suspicious. Like, why would you not... You know, if you go to your friend's house to pick her up and something happens, you end up not picking her up, why would you not go to your other friend? And if you're not going to go to your other friend, why would you not even give her a phone call and be like, hey, I'm not coming because XYZ?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and lay this out for you. This is kind of my thought when I read about her sort of being suspected. And investigators, obviously, they spoke to her to get as many details as possible. So number one, we have Barbara's mom, who dropped her off. So she knows that she was dropped off there. She knows the time frames of when Barbara was dropped off when she came home. Two, I don't believe that she was involved in any way. I mean, unless we look at it like the Sims family murders, where, keep in mind, Barbara at this point would have to play the role of Charlie, and we would have to have someone else involved, a boy who was older and stronger. He would kind of play the role of Vernon Fox. If you remember the case that we covered.
The Sims family
exactly,
murder, yeah.
The 4-part series we covered. That was sort of the case where Charlie sort of egged Vernon Fox on. Because I don't think Barbara could have perpetuated this crime herself. She was the same age, the same stature. I don't think that she could have done the things so violently done to Beverly. So right. I think it would have had to have been somebody else if, in fact, she was going to handle that, or she was going to be involved in that, I should say, rather. I don't consider her at all in this case a suspect. And I can only imagine that once she was brought in as a suspect, what it had to be like and what she had to endure after all the kids in the school got this information. So once this information circulates around the campus, could you imagine what that was like? I mean, thinking that she may have killed her friend, people coming after, hey, what'd you do? What'd you do? You know, and like we say in so many cases here that we cover, you know, Beverly was the one who ultimately was murdered. She wasn't the only victim here. So So we have Eleanor Jarosz. This is Beverly's mother. Now, she carried this grief silently with her all of her life until she passed away in 2018. Quote, "We didn't mention her name," end quote, Carol said in a 2014 interview. "It was there under the surface always." The family stayed with Eleanor's parents in the days after the murder, as investigators and newspaper and TV photographers and reporters trooped to the house. The family was just murdered, and all these people are there, you know, just going through everything and rummaging through the house just for a story. The relatives scoured the blood from the floor before the family returned, so they get family members to come in and clean up the crime scene, if you will, not like it is today. A parish priest blessed the home, room by room, affixing a medal that still remains above an entry door. And Carol felt afraid in her own home, especially at night, which makes perfect sense. I mean, she eventually returned to her old bedroom, but it always bothered me, she said. As a high school freshman, she entered the convent at Marymount as an aspirant. Can you read that?
As a high school freshman, she entered the convent at Marymount as an aspirant in the Sisters of St. Joseph of the Third Order of St. Francis, living there for 2 years. She thought she might become a nun.
A nun?
I was happy when she went to the convent, Eleanor said. I thought she was going to be safe there. Ted Jarosz, who died in 2012, stayed alone in the family house for almost 30 years after he and his wife divorced. He left everything as it was in 1964, down to the radio in the living room, hoping that a jury someday might need to visit.
So he lived in that house without touching anything in hopes that someone would be caught and they would have to come and scour for evidence.
That a jury might have to walk through the
Exactly.
home. Beverly's friend Barbara, who she was supposed to meet up with that day, has been targeted by armchair detectives and later online commenters.
Yeah.
And I guess we're guilty of that.
To some extent,
To
yes.
some extent right now, because we did mention her. Sorry, Barbara. Harassment fell on a boy who gave Barbara a ride, and the boy who drove Beverly home, and other neighbors and friends. In the days after the murder, the unrelated suicide of a Garfield Heights teenager, normally a very private matter, became a front page story. People in the area were afraid. And as I mentioned, one of those people was my mother, who gave me the idea for this story, and it still bothers her to this day.
I can imagine. Something like that is very traumatic. So it's not just, again, the victims are not necessarily just the actual victim.
Right.
In the case, it's a lot of people around it, family members, students in the school that she attended, her teachers that, loved her to death, and people that just respected and cared for her, and the other kids in the community, because they found themselves, like, here's someone my age that goes to school, that, oh my God, this can happen to me.
We do have some suspects. There are at least 2 prime suspects, said Detective Carl Bagecki of the Garfield Heights Police Department in an interview with Fox 8 5 years ago. Through technology and science and some other investigative routes, we were able to develop them. However, we need another piece of the puzzle. The Ohio Attorney General's office issued a renewed call for information in 2020. Ohio Attorney General David Yost featured a photo of the slain 16-year-old on his office's Facebook page, which regularly highlights unsolved murders and major crimes throughout the state. Yost's office did not say whether his office chose to spotlight the case for any specific reason or whether investigators have developed any serious tips about the case in recent years.
They said that in this case that there is a slight amount of DNA, I think, to some effect.
Well, that was something that keeps popping in my head through this whole time we've been talking about this, is the rope around her neck. Somebody is using a rope to strangle her. There has got to be skin cells on that rope. So I wonder if they still have the rope, which they can hopefully get some DNA off of. And at this point, I think familial DNA would be the route to go.
Well, it makes sense that in 1964, DNA wasn't really a thing. So
it wasn't a thing at all.
That's what I'm saying. So when they're collecting the evidence, they're bagging evidence. They're not necessarily caring for it in such a way to assume that at some point DNA is going to matter. Usually back then it's polygraphs and blood types and hair follicles, and fingerprints and footprints. That's kind of the Scooby-Doo aspects of a detective case and the clues. That's kind of what you look for. So I don't think they collected the stuff in such a way to where the DNA might be safe at this point. What do you think?
I don't know.
If they have
I really don't know.
If they have DNA, I got to believe at some point, we got to get somebody involved that could potentially get that processed.
All right. Well, if you have any information that can help, please call the Garfield Heights Police Department at 216-475-5686. That's 216-475-5686.
And don't forget, sometimes if you ask someone about a case or a story like Lauren's mother, they might remember something that could just be what detectives need.
Exactly.
So everyone, I guess that's going to be it for tonight.
If you'd like to support the show again, please subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/Palmahawk Media. That's PALMAHAWK Media.
Check out our website for links to all of our social media, Patreon, merch store, and much, much more.
Please make sure to subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're listening on and rate and review, hopefully 5 stars.
Of course, 5 stars.
This really helps us branch out and reach a wider audience.
And as always, thank you everyone for listening
To Paradise After Dark.
Duck, 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 duck.